Filipina. The revolution failed because it was badly led, because its leader won his post by reprehensible rather than meritorious acts, because instead of supporting the men most useful to the people, he made them useless out of jealousy. Identifying the aggrandizement of the people with his own, he judged the worth of men not by their ability, character, and patriotism, but rather by their degree of friendship and kinship with him. And anxious to secure the readiness of his favorites to sacrifice themselves for him, he was tolerant even of their transgressions. Because he thus neglected the people forsook him, and forsaken by the people, he was bound to fall like a waxen idol melting in the heat of adversity. God grant we do not forget such a terrible lesson learned at the cost of untold suffering. So when we return, we'll talk with a veteran columnist and political scientist about his view on what the enduring theme of the first decade has been and what it might be for the coming new one. Welcome back to The Explainer. Joining me is Professor Alex Magno, who writes for the Philippine Star. Professor, you started off the year by taking a look at the past decade, and like the Washington Post, you felt that it was in many ways a wasted one.
Well, yeah, it's my basic attitude is that every year that passes where the poverty rate remains the same is a lost year. And we've had a whole decade that passed where the poverty rate remained constant. And so I thought it was a lost decade in that sense.
Well, but you also, I think, pointed out in your column that you had a case of institutions that were very hard-pressed to try to function as planned, although you've always been critical of the whole design of the structure. So how did that play out over the past 10 years, and how we have no way out of the present system, so how's that playing out in the next?
Well, we're trapped both by weak institutions and by old orthodoxies. I mean, our whole agriculture is dead because we think that the right thing to do is to cut up the land rather than consolidate agriculture. Our institutions are both weak and demoralized. Partly because of politics, which is unavoidable. The electoral cycle is too short by design, but also because bureaucratic reform is the toughest nut to crack. I mean, it's easy to do economic legislation, but bureaucratic reform is the toughest nut to deal with. And unless we do bureaucratic reform in a really drastic way, our institutions will remain weak. I mean,
but you're looking at a country where the government remains the largest employer. So in many ways, any attempt at reforming the system is an attack on the livelihoods of a great deal of people.
That's true. I mean, the basic formula, I think, is to cut the payroll by half and double wages for those who remain. But that's not possible. I mean, it's conceivable, but it's politically impracticable. And unless we do that, our institutions will be weak and demoralized.
I mean, you as a political scientist, you've always approached things from an institutional perspective, and at the same time, the public perception is that while some institutions are weak or weakening, that others have flourished and increased in power, and in a sense, you have an executive that was designed to be hampered in many ways to avoid the excesses of Marcos, being like water, sort of flowing to fill in the power vacuum in many ways. How will this play out? Because we've had 10 years of this.
Well, in political science, where I work, there's a basic differentiation between power and authority. Institutions are instruments of authority. Politics is, of course, about power. And not only in the last decade, but in the many decades past, I mean, there has been a constant struggle between authority and power. And oftentimes it's authority that loses to power, which is the case, and
What
I
is
don't
the,
see any
what is the
near-term
role
solution.
in what is a public consensus is supposed to be the arbiter. It's what allows tough decisions to be made or forces you to avoid them. It's what confers a mandate and withdraws it. For 10 years, we've had an essential divide. Do you see any ways of consensus coming back?
For the last 10 years, there's been a basic distrust of government in general, the presidency in particular. And I think the challenge of the next election is to cure that culture of cynicism and distrust for authority. I don't see any ready means for converting electoral mandate into an ability to build consensus. But building consensus is what elections should be all about.
You know, when we were divided over the question of charter change, for example, I remember that one point where we did seem to agree on was that there were certain steps that could be taken that have a chance to build confidence, that open up the ability to pursue further changes once people realize that, hey, it's not so scary after all. But we've never seen those half measures attempted. It was always going for broke. Do you think this is possible?
Which is characteristic of any political condition that tends to be highly polarized. Nothing really moves in a highly polarized condition because there's no compromise and eventually there's no consensus. The last 10 years was a highly polarized decade. I think if you're looking for a theme to this decade, it has to be polarization. I mean, we began this decade with EDSA DOS, we'll end it with elections.
Division either way.
It's division either way and division all throughout.
In a society like ours where the themes, the ideas are often incarnated in a person, another commentary in the Washington Post says that one problem, for example, Obama has is that in many ways he is operating as the anti-Bush, and this results in the Bush loyalists fiercely attempting to bring him down, even though Obama himself said he's a consensus building president. So in many ways we are in a similar situation. And how do you see that playing out? Do we have to wait for everyone to die or among the older generation? Or?
Well, Obama was great during the campaign because he was pure, he was symbolic, iconic, and he drew in the expectations of a large swath of the population. But now he has to be president. He has to order up troops in Afghanistan. I mean, the daily things that presidents do and that divide opinion. And we're facing an elections where I think from where we stand today, it seems that I mean there's a certain romantic element in this campaign, and we might tend to invest too much in individuals.
Well, this brings up the question of how different is the public perception of, let's say, a job like the presidency from the nuts and bolts of the job. And because this plays out into the romantic expectations, as you put it, and the quick dose of reality that most new presidents encounter when they try to implement what they've been campaigning on.
Well, the presidency we know is the toughest job anywhere, but especially in this country because people invest in your person a lot of expectations. They expect you to be both in charge of everything from rescuing people during calamities to foreign policy. And at the same time, they expect you